Good evening. I'm going to try to get my mic working because I know my mic is sounding terrible because I'm using the original mic to the computer that's built in. But before I do that, I have one guest so far. This is an open invitation room if there's anybody out there who would like to contribute to the discussion on the topic at hand. This is not an open discussion or an open topic room. It is about the nature of Christ and in church history and the implications for doctrine, as discussed. If you watched it, the debate between Warren McGrew, idol killer, and Dan Champa regarding total depravity, but all that comes to bear, right? I read part of a paper last night regarding within my denominational tradition, the discussion from a scholar on a basic overview of the issues and the development in Christian history, the early church, on the nature of Christ, and it seems to me it's largely argued from what Scripture has to say on the matter, and some philosophy, and so I covered some of that, and I talked about within Adventism, there's actually two kind of schools of thought which have not come to an agreement per se, right? Because there's arguments for either view. I mean, namely, did Christ have a pre-fallen sinful nature like that of Adam before he fell? Or did Christ take on a human nature that was according to the nature of man after Adam fell, which we inherit, presumably, right? We all die. We're all mortal after all. There's lots of questions you could ask there, but that was part of the discussion. But now I have a guest with me, which I'll introduce here, and if you want to join the discussion, just tag me in the live chat and I'll give you the link. But I want to stay on topic or very related topics. But until anybody does join, we decided that we're going to talk about some of the views that were rejected in the early church, like one of the big names that's famously understood as one of the first heresies, quote unquote, is Arius. And welcome to my guest so far, which is... You guessed it. Not a Christological heretic, Ryan the Presbyterian. I was reading Ryan, I got to say, I was reading the Church Fathers recently, and many of them, they actually mention so-and-so as being a presbyter. So obviously, Presbyterians have been around from the very beginning, obviously, right? Maybe he's not back yet.
Something like that.
So, I mean, are you going to agree with that, or are you going to explain why I'm a bumptious retard?
Well, I mean, I could excoriate you if you like, but I'm not a certain hooded hate preacher, so I don't think I'm too.
Just so you know, I have had a testicle removed, so you could go there.
Oh, so are you saying you're a ballless man?
I have one testicle because of cancer. Yes, some people have used that against me, but
I will not sink to the levels of certain rednecks that have decided to attack you over that.
Yeah, it's rather ugly. So, I mean,
I think
we're Presbyterians. I mean, I don't get it. Help me here. Like, it says presbyter. There was presbyters around. How's that even possible, man?
There were those in the early church that had what would become the Presbyterian form of government. So there have been those that had something of an Episcopalian view, those that had something of a Presbyterian view, but really the view that seems to have very minimal support is the Baptist view. I know that would make them very upset. But nonetheless, they're not really the ones that are in the main. However, germane to our topic, I was going to begin by reading a question from the larger catechism, question number 11. And I think we can begin to explain the issues with Arianism, or as it's more commonly known today, Unitarianism. Question 11, how doth it appear that the Son and the Holy Ghost are equal with God the Father? Answer, the Scriptures manifest that the Son and the Holy Ghost are equal with God the Father, ascribing to them such names, attributes, works, and worship as are proper to God only. And of course, all throughout the Bible, you see this. John 2, verses 24 and 25 says, for example, but Jesus did not commit himself unto them because he knew all men, and needed not that any should testify of man, for he knew what was in man. Obviously, that would imply he's God, because God knows the thoughts of the heart. Jesus knew what his audience was thinking prior to their thinking it. And herein we see the inherent problem, for example, with Arianism. So would you like to define Arianism, or what would you like to do now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to use this seems appropriate. It seems like a good, the Wikipedia one isn't too bad on this. So if you have a better source, I'll let you do it. But I just give some basic stuff here.
Well, I pulled up gotquestions.org if you want to.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. You go ahead and do that. Why don't you share the screen if you can? But if not, that's fine.
Yeah, hold on just a moment. Let me do something. Pull this.
I mean, I'm more going to put it in. I'll probably make slides if we kind of do more details on kind of the timeline here. I'd like to have like a chart for that to demonstrate. But
I'm sure we can get to that in the future.
The basics are, I'd like to get his like when he was, what his distinctions were, and I mean he was a presbyter. It does say here that he was a presbyter, so I mean,
can you see the screen?
So I guess you're an Arian then, right? Because he's a presbyter, and you're.
Jamie, I was asking if you can see the screen.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, you haven't heard me.
No, I heard you. No, Arius, by all accounts, was a fake presbyter. He was a heretic. And ironically, if you go to Philip Schaff's Creeds of the Christian Church, his creed is beautiful. It is honestly, excluding the anti-Trinitarianism, a well-written creed, but it is what is omitted that is obviously what is so dangerous. As we read here on GodQuestions.org, Arianism is a heresy named for Arius, a priest and false teacher in the early 4th century AD in Alexandria, Egypt. Of course, this is no wonder. Alexandria, Egypt was home to all manner of strange things during this time and many different heretics. One of the earliest and probably the most important item of debate among early Christians was the subject of Christ's deity. Was Jesus truly God in the flesh, or was Jesus a created being? Was Jesus God or not? Arius denied the deity of the Son of God, holding that Jesus was created by God as the first act of creation, and that the nature of Christ was aninomos, unlike that of God the Father. Arianism, then, is a view that Jesus is a finite created being with some divine attributes, but he is not eternal and not divine himself. Now, I'll stop sharing and we can go from there. But that's a brief definition for Arianism, or as it's called now, a Unitarianism. It's gone nowhere. You see forms of it all over the internet, and you especially see it in places like Jehovah's Witness.
Yeah, I did cover some interesting points on this yesterday, but I might want to go mention a few things here. I would point out that he was, so I just take presbyter to mean like a position of authority to some degree, or being a leader, having a leadership role of some kind within a church, which seems to be the case. I would just say that, I mean, there's different ways we can come at this. I don't think he was just like a filthy heretic wanting to do damage. I think he was wrong. I just think, and I'm not trying to soften the idea that it's okay to be an Arian. I don't believe that. I would just say, I'm not sure how to look at it. I don't know enough about him, but I would point to the idea that was problematic is that do you think it was more of a Jewish view overemphasized, or do you think
I don't know if I would speculate on Arius's intent or Arius's import, right. But we know, as I was reading, that he utterly denied that the Father and the Son are alike. He said they, in fact, were unlike one another, and we know
they did not have the same substance. They're not of the same substance.
Right?
I mean,
homoousios, not homoousios.
Yes,
that was part of the centrality of the debate, without getting into some of those particulars. Now, obviously, this creates plenty of problems. In Isaiah 6, verse 3, it says, "And one cried to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." And we know that Jesus Christ is ultimately called the same thing in the Revelation. It said that he is also holy, holy, holy. We know in 1 Corinthians 2, verses 10 to 11, it says, "But God hath revealed them unto us by his Spirit. For the Spirit searcheth all things, the deep things of God. For what man knoweth the things of God, save the spirit of man which is in him? Even so the things of God knoweth no man. but the Spirit of God, showing the obvious equality. And this is really where you got into an issue. And it really hasn't changed with the Jehovah's Witnesses or what have you.
Okay, so so basically, I'm almost got it here in front of me.
Oh, Jamie, look in the backstage.
Oh, cool. Hey, it's that heretic CJ who doesn't believe you. Who's a closet works-based Atarian, and he thinks that you can lose your salvation now, right,
Oh,
CJ?
remember also he's a modalist too, so you leave that in there. He thinks, according to Clueless in Oklahoma, that Jesus is not the Father, but he is the Father. So what say you heretic?
Well, I guess if I'm a heretic, I should probably shave.
Well, I mean, are you trying to sneak your oneness in tentacles into up my skirt, or what? What's going on? I'm just being sarcastic, people.
Well, hey,
CJ is none of those things.
I'm apparently also a Pentecostal, despite the fact that I haven't been a part of the Pentecostal movement in 8 years. And
I thought I heard hooting and hollering back there when you thought the mic was off.
What's that?
I could have sworn I heard hooting and hollering when you thought your mic was off. I knew it.
What, me or Jamie? Or,
well, aren't you a Pentecostal? Are you not a Pentecostal? Don't they hoot and holler and all that?
Oh, a lot of them do, but no, there's not all of them do, but many of them do. If not arguably most of them, but no, I mean, I haven't been a part of that movement in years.
Oh, okay. So yeah, he wouldn't even know. So that was just I misheard. Obviously, he wasn't speaking in tongues or whatever. I guess the Pentecostals do that, don't they? I don't really care.
Most of them, but nonetheless,
not all of them. But yeah, let's stay on topic here.
I see that Brother Jamie. Oh Lord, have mercy! I'm now fusing Jamie and CJ in my head. But CJ, what say you, friend? I'm glad to see you're here.
Oh well, I'm just not really. I don't really have much to say on the topic so far. I'm sure as conversation goes on, we'll have more to say. But
yeah, CJ. Okay, I want to make one thing. I want to just make this public, even though it's not on the topic, just because some people left up. Actually, there was quite a few comments, and I think people were misunderstanding. Just for the record, this is for the record. I do not have cancer. I had cancer, and because of that cancer, I had body parts removed that had to be removed, and they don't grow back. And so I do not have cancer. I'm cancer free for like over 10 years now. And so I'm out of the woods. I do not have cancer, but because I did, I have many things removed. Okay, like more than one thing, and of really different parts of my body. So I won't get into that. But my point is, I do not have cancer. I didn't claim that I do have cancer. People misunderstood that. So just want to make that clear. Not suggesting I have cancer. I do not. So, what's your thoughts on Arius, CJ, on the Arian controversy? I think we have a similar view. I suspect he didn't necessarily mean to do, to be as careless as maybe some other people were, but I'm not even sure on that. What are your thoughts? We don't need to speculate in that way, if like Ryan said, but I'm just curious if you had any thoughts about. I don't think they should have burned Arians at the stake,
Yeah, I definitely don't buy that either. I don't think. I think that, in fact, that's one of my biggest problems with the current Christian nationalist movement is even if it's not executions, I'm not sure that I want people punished at the stake, not only for Christological differences or being potentially even heretical, but even like non-Christians. I think that I don't think it's the state's job to tell somebody that it's illegal to be an atheist. Or a oneness Pentecostal or a Jehovah's Witness or whatever it happens to be. So I definitely agree with you on that.
We were all on the same page originally when we came to America as Christians to flee the oppression of Rome, seems to me.
Yeah, exactly. The goal here was to not do that. And to be fair, that's one of the primary developments of the Reformation. I know the earliest reformers were sacralists. But that's I think that has a lot to do with the era they lived in, right? I mean, it's reforming for a reason. You had to shake off all of the dust of Romanism, and to expect it all to happen in one generation, I think was faulty.
Did you find out why your monetization was off, by the way?
Yeah, I got it turned back on.
Good.
It had something to do with not verifying identity or something like that, but I identity verified and all that.
So then it wasn't a subterfuge by angry opposers to your theology or anything.
No, it was not. Praise did not do anything of that nature.
Good. I didn't think so. I just want to make that clear because people were kind of like throwing that around, and I think we should say that's not the case if it's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, I do think that I want to be clear on that element. Now, granted, historically speaking, the Arians also persecuted the Trinitarians whenever they had power. So, tomato in a sense, everybody was guilty of it. Well, I guess not everybody. Modalists never persecuted anybody, but they also never had power. So
it's also important to remember. Excuse me. It's important to remember in the era of the Reformed or the magisterial reformers, the notion was unilateral across the board. If you find heresy, you cut it out. Therefore,
and I think the development towards religious freedom, Luther certainly started it, but it had to move from there, I think, right? Like we had, for example, I think Calvin made significant jumps towards it. Knox really is the guy who started to seriously develop the idea, although he still wasn't quite there yet. And then finally the Baptists, I think, John Smith and 1645 London Confession are the ones who finally had it clearly articulated. And I think they were right. Now, with that being said, so that's about what to do about Arianism and stuff like that, right? But as far as like Arius himself, I find the conversation to be very interesting. Not because Arius was in any way correct, because he wasn't. And his view is probably most in line with Jehovah's Witnesses today, although I don't think that's quite right. I think Arius had a slightly higher Christology than a Jehovah's Witness does.
Arius would have a higher Christology than the current JWs. Somewhere in the 50s, the doctrine changed from Jesus was a God who was to be worshipped or could receive worship to Jesus is not God, who is therefore unworthy of worship. That would have been unacceptable to Arius. Arius would have deified Jesus, but he did not regard him obviously as God.
Yeah, exactly. And so
let me read a quote from Arius here that kind of gets to the point. I think I may have read it last night in my introduction to this subject. But
hey, toss it up on the screen.
Sorry, I got confused because my YouTube is open. Okay, yeah, I'll put it on the screen. Hold on. Yeah, that's a good idea. I don't think I need to put the source in there too. I was going to share it in the description. I usually do. Okay. Can you see this? Is it coming up or do I have to download it? I'm going to have to download it first because it's a PDF thing. Hold on.
Yeah, if you've got a PDF, you'll have to download it.
Let me just go ahead and put the source in there now if somebody wants to access it so you can look it up yourself too. But here it is.
Drop it in the chat, and what you can do is open it in another tab in your browser. You can probably see it.
Yes, I will do that, yeah. Give me a second.
Stefan, we already did that. If you rewind several minutes, we gave a brief introduction, to Arius.
So guys, help me keep an eye on the chat. I'll try to, but if you want to join the chat and stay on topic or things that are directly related to the topic, which is Christology and even the soteriological implications, which is part of what I was talking about yesterday, that's fine. It does how that may or may not affect, total depravity and prevenient grace and all that stuff. That has relation. That's about as far away from it as I want to get, but that's open to discussion. I want to stay on the issue of how does Christology affect other doctrines and why is that good or bad, and how, and what verses, what does the Bible have to say about the issue, and what should we believe
Well,
about
ironically, we have it's not quite a contemporaneous Unitarian. He's more of an Ebionite in the form of A's philosophy. But that I guess would exclude him, though, from Unitarianism, because the Ebionites did not share Unitarianism with Arius. Nonetheless, though, it would definitely put him in a position that would be closer to that, I suppose.
Oh, yeah. By the way, he did say that he would be willing to join.
Oh, did you want to join? Okay. Yeah. So, but here's the other thing I ask, and I don't mean to like put special stipulations on you, Ace. I would just say this: I do not want to get into. I only want to talk about accepted source material that is, I mean, for the most part, majority accepted history. I don't want to talk about things whether they may be true or not. I don't care. Just want to talk about the issues that are contemporary issues to the greater Christian community, because I just don't want to go down those side trails. I want to talk about the issues according to what Scripture says and what fathers in the church said that are accepted, sources. Any other questions about doubting that being accurate source? I really don't want to go down that road. So just please, let's stay on the topic of the issues of Christology and the
right. And if I may also say, look, we've hammered the issue of obeying Christ and the issue of Jesus being the Messiah to death. Please don't get on that subject, man.
I mean, if you want to make arguments from Bible verses, that's fine. You can oppose my view. I'm not saying you have to agree with it, but just I don't want to go down other avenues. I want to stay on.
We're just asking you to stick germane to the topic. That's all.
All right, I'm gonna try and behave tonight. And that's gonna be a tough task, but if I go off the rails, just boot me. That's fine.
Okay.
My feelings won't get hurt.
I'll steer you back, and I'm not saying you always do that. I have certain ideas of what I want to actually talk about.
Yeah. Well, I do it sometimes, and I admit that. So
you do. I know you do.
I'm glad you recognize it.
But
I just want to, just for the sake of the audience, Ace Velocity, he do. Okay.
I do.
Funny.
But I'm a big fan of Arius. I don't agree with everything he said. I don't agree. I think, I look at, but the general idea, I actually think Arius was, when I read the New Testament and try to figure out a Christology, I think Arius actually came the closest, as far as I can tell. And the way I understand Arian, and the way I understand Arianism is basically that God the Father is Yahweh and is the only true God, but that Jesus, who had a sort of a pre-existence as the Logos or a special angel, a special creation of God, something along those lines, was sort of a special creation or a special being.
He was begotten. After all, he was begotten, right?
He was begotten. Yes, Jesus, in his pre-existence, was a creation and thus had a beginning.
What's interesting about this is that the Arian position, the Jehovah's Witness position, because they hold that view, right? And they are related. That view has historical ties with that group, which has historical ties with my background, which is Adventist, right? And what's interesting about this is, if I recall, you're not a monist or you are a dualist, aren't you?
Yes, I do believe.
So interesting, because here's the point I want to make, and I'll shut up. I think so. Like, people will accuse Adventists because they're physicalists, essentially, of like the implications are of going down this road, right? But Adventists don't take that road. But it's interesting that you take that Arian view and that reading of Scripture, which I don't agree with, obviously. But I when I said that's fair, I just mean I can see where you're coming from. I don't agree with it. But in other words, seems like you guys ought to take on a monist view or a physicalist type of view, where man is like, because if you're going to say Christ is just a man, and in some sort of weird metaphysical sense, he pre-existed, but not as like a person per se, right? Is that what you're saying? It just seems like that. Well, we'll get into that, but I want to talk about where I see issues with the trying to make Jesus one person with two natures and have all the constituent parts that make him up as a human without mixing it all up. Maybe you guys can help me. Maybe you guys have an argument I just don't get yet, and I'm not seeing it. But sorry. So I mean, it seemed. I just wanted to mention that it's interesting that do you think the divine Logos was a person before Jesus was born as a man?
The divine Logos, or Logos, however you want to pronounce it.
It wasn't a person other than that it's God the Father's Logos, right?
It was not. It was not a person. The only way the Logos has a will, a mind. It's conscious. It's aware. It's intelligent, but obviously at a level that's far greater than anything we recognize in the human experience, because apparently this Logos was involved in the creation of the universe. So this is far beyond anything that we can compare in the human experience, for sure.
Okay, that's interesting. So for the audience sake, A's is an Arian. The three of us are going to say, to varying degrees of fervency, that it is a heresy. That is, it is a highly problematic understanding of the nature of Christ, and we'll get into why that is. So, but just for the audience sake, A's would take an Arian view, so he would be agreeing with Arius, and we wouldn't, which is more of the historical majority position. So, go. I'd like to hear what you guys would say, or what you want to say to what he just said. Go ahead, Ryan or CJ. You have any thoughts on that?
I have a couple thoughts. I'm trying to kind of collect them all in my head. I don't think Arianism is tenable. Arianism, is tenable, namely because I just think the Bible is very clear about Jesus' position as deity. I think we would all agree that Paul is quite clear on that. But I would even argue that the rest of the gospel writer, or the rest of the New Testament writers rather, all 8 of them, 9 if you think Hebrews was written by somebody else, I think are rather clear on the issue. And it does seem to me like the church fathers are relatively clear on the issue too as well, which doesn't necessarily mean that it's right. It's just to say that not only do I think the New Testament agrees here, but also those in the immediate aftermath, for the most part, tend to agree also. Though, admittedly, of course, there's some weirdness, right? You have Ebionites, you do have Valentinians, you do have Marcion, so it's not as cut and dry as we would like it to be, no doubt. I do have a level of sympathy for Arius the man, in that he kind of got railroaded, I think, in a way that was not, how do I put this? I think the Council of Nicaea was a bad thing, I guess is what I'm trying to get at. Not because of anything it said per se, but because of the concept of ecumenical councils in general. I think that you have all these people who they hardly agree with anybody on anything, but they're all going to get together and say, but we all don't agree with this guy on this thing, and so we're going to pretend that's somehow different than all the stuff we disagree with each other on. And further, the bigger problem is signing up with the Roman government, such that now whoever had control of the Roman government, whether that be the Arians or the Trinitarians, has the ability to come down with the sword. And post-Augustine would do so frequently, because Augustine, is, for all the good he did, he also is the first Christian thinker to clearly articulate the idea that torturing somebody for their soul is cool. Which is, honestly, if I can be so bold, one of the most evil things I think any Christian thinker has ever thought of. So I sympathize somewhat with Arius the man, while also recognizing that his view is, in my own opinion, not tenable and clearly heretical. I will also say this too: I'm somewhat of a squish on issues of Christ's nature or Christology, in so much as that I think there is wiggle room outside of the modern mainstream Trinitarian position. Like, I don't consider modalists unsaved, for example. I think that modalism and Trinitarianism are both equally Christian, because they affirm all the things that I find to be important, which are Father, Son, and Holy Spirit are co-eternal, consubstantial, all the one being that is God, and all equally deity. And so in that sense, I'm sure some people might take issue with, like I said, my quote squishness. And I tend to have a similar squishness as it pertains to semi-Arians, which those are the ones who said that Christ was homoousios, but not homoousios. In other words, of a similar substance, but not necessarily of the same substance. Because again, they would affirm all of the three, all of the three main points that I think are important, which are
they would affirm the three beings. They would disagree on what the nature and relation of those beings would be.
Yeah, exactly, right. And they would also affirm that all three of them were deity. Deity in the Jewish sense, not deity in the Greek sense, because of course you can have greater and lesser deities in the Greek sense, but in the Jewish sense, there's only one being that is deity. So like I said, I just want to get that out in front so that nobody thinks that I'm being dishonest with them. I am relatively soft on this issue, but I do agree that there is a point of crossing the line, namely the rejection of the personal nature of either of the three, or the theistic nature of either of the three.
Okay, right. Well, Ryan's developing the courage to oppose you on that. Let me read this quote real quick. I'm just teasing, kind of teasing.
Well, no, just
you disagree, right?
Huh?
I suspect you would not agree with that, right?
Agree with which?
With what CJ is his position here.
No, I would disagree with CJ's position regarding the Nicene Council and ecumenical creeds. I would also disagree somewhat with his statements regarding Augustine, but I'm not going to engage with that specifically. My point is obvious, though, that historic Trinitarian theology, where I don't think CJ would disagree, has said since time immemorial that those who do not frame the doctrine of the Trinity at all are unregenerate. Now, where perhaps CJ and I would disagree is that this would also apply to so-called Christian heretics, which would be those who are professing to be Christians, and yet they do not frame the Trinity as we would know it today. Of course, during the development of the church, we don't have a perfect statement of the Trinity as we would see it today, but it certainly has been taught since at least, and prior to, in some cases, AD 100. The claim that the Nicene Council, for example, invented the Trinity is simply ahistoric and an uneducated remark. So that being said, I concur definitely with most of the statements if we were to talk about the doctrine. Now, insofar as sympathizing with Arius, well, I don't necessarily care about the man. I care about what he taught.
Yeah, I don't want to drift too much from the topic per se, although I have some interesting questions about this, because trying to be very unbiased and because it's easy to sympathize if you have some ties, and I'm not saying any of you, I'm speaking for myself. I actually don't really think there was any thread of Arianism in the early Adventism, although people make that case, but I think it's confused. but it doesn't really matter that much to me in the sense of like what I actually believe. I don't like believe it because they said it per se. It's related, obviously, right? Just like we all have our backgrounds that shape who we are or whatever. But I would argue is what is an interesting question about what CJ brought up for me anyways. And of course I have my understanding of prophecy and, you know, the how to interpret it. But it's like so you could have, like, I think we should pay attention to what the early church said and it has weight. But I think we have to carefully decide what kind of weight it really has and how much impact we should give it. And I think it has to be carefully considered, especially if most people agreed on something and they have good evidence and reasons for it, you know, and it was only very little. But that still isn't shouldn't be the deciding factor, right? Scripture is. So then the other thing is, when exactly did the church go bad, and what was it ultimately that we can say this system is bad now? It's not like, oh yeah, on this date, you know, Satan walked in and sat on the throne and kicked everybody out that was God.
You cannot say that the church has gone bad.
Well, I mean, by that I just mean the Roman church, the church that was turning Roman and gaining civil power.
Well,
when exactly did it have too much power?
You can probably say definitively that it began to be corrupted by about 120, but definitely by the 400 to 600, you started to see a proto-papacy. And by the time of so-called Gregory the Great, you see what we would recognize as contemporaneous papacy. So it didn't take very long before the Roman church went from what it was to now the harlot. But that is a different discussion.
Right. So, but that it's interesting though, because you might ask, because if we affirm, which I think we should, as Protestants, that we do not desire the church and state to be united in America or any other Western Christian countries or formerly Christian countries, and the notion of liberty and freedom and the knowledge of history seems to me Christians should. I'm very convinced that separation of church and state is a really basic principle in this, at least you could say in this dispensation or under this covenant or with where we're at historically. God doesn't want the civil power to unite with the church, and I don't think that's the thing, is he doesn't want it to. Well, God is sovereign, right? So is what I'm saying is just like, is it right or wrong according to God? It is wrong, and so that's the thing. Like, I don't think Arius was right, but I don't think it's right for the church to have civil power and go about running their killing people. What do you call it? I'm sorry, it's slipping my mind. The inquisitions and such. So, I mean, but again, I can entertain the idea that, like, look, man, this was early church. Like, if we just let everybody go willy-nilly from the very start, because we know that there was heresy coming into the church, even in the writings of the New Testament, they were warning against it. So it's like, did it require some sort of structure, as it happened historically, to make sure we didn't go totally astray and the gospel get entirely lost? So that the Protestant Reformation was needed, you know. So we can't really say the church was needed because we came out of that church, right? So there's so many interesting issues. So my point was just that, is it right for us? So yeah, if you want to join the chat, I just need you to let me know so I know it's who you are in the live chat. Okay. I suspect I know who it is, but because the channel is not coming up as that person's channel of who they're saying they are, I am not going to let you in unless you show me that it's you in the live chat. So you got to do that. Bye. Because I know that there's very mischievous people who are mad at me right now, and they send their little munchkins over here to do disgusting things because they're children. So I have to be careful. So anyways, that's why I'm kicking you. If it's who you say you are, I apologize, but I got to be careful. And I asked to please demonstrate who you are in the live chat so I can check what channel you're from. The channels that are coming up in the private here are not the person who they say they are. Okay, so
I have a feeling I know who that could be, and if it is, they're not here for any good reason.
Yeah, because I don't think the person who's claiming to the person who it's claiming to be wouldn't be interested in this conversation, for one. Two, they're not following my simple suggestion of just demonstrating that it's them. So sorry. Anyways, it's not too big of a request of me. So at any rate, I'm saying this. I mean, if we believe, it's kind of like if we believe racism is bad, it would be nice if the church wasn't racist in the past. But we can talk about why there's cultural context to be had. But look, if it's true, I mean, I tend to think we should have always known that we don't go around killing heretics, and that liberty, freedom, and liberty to serve God is between you and God, not between you and the state to dictate it to you. Because our mediator is between us and God is Jesus, not the civil power or the church with the civil arm or whatever. It's just that seems wrong. Sorry for going on so long. Any thoughts on that?
I'm a monarchist, so we probably shouldn't go in that direction. And
I don't mind you opposing me. I'd like to be challenged.
What I'm saying is that if we go in that direction, then we're going to get way off of the subject of Arianism and into a bunch of other things.
Okay, well, let me quote this then, and then I'll let you kind of take
Well, can I add one thought real quickly?
Yeah.
I just want to say, I don't think, and perhaps you would want to clarify that you were somewhat of a sacralist or something like that, but I don't think the separation of church and state and monarchism are mutually incompatible, personally.
Say that again. Monarchism and the separation of church and state are you're saying they are compatible?
I think there's no reason why a monarch couldn't have a policy of separation of church and state. In fact, I think most monarchies in the West post-Reformation did so, at least to some extent. Obviously the Church of England, the head of the Church of England is the king. But if you go like to France, for example, the clergy and the aristocracy were two different bodies, and the king almost played moderator between them. I'm not trying to fight you, Ryan, or anything like that. I'm just saying, technically, you could be a monarchist and also believe in concepts like religious liberty or separation of church and state, which are not in and of themselves the same thing. Because technically, there's religious liberty in England right now to an extent, and they don't separate church and state. So there's a lot of
I can see your point insofar as that you are technically correct. You could have a monarchy which would then theoretically coexist with the separation of the powers. However, I still don't contend that is going to necessarily work. And well, the discussion of why I would be a monarchist is really not one that I think is going to be very edifying, perhaps. Especially,
I'll be a monarchist when Jesus comes back, but before then, no thank you.
Well, I would expect a millenarian to say so much, but I can.
Well, I think we if we're going to learn from history, and by the way, I want to. B.S. Lewis says, "Who's killing heretics?" I think the only appropriate place to kill heretics is probably at a Catholic hospice as a nurse. But that's I'm just kidding. Just a joke. Okay, I think you should care for Catholics until their last breath, the best care possible. Okay, it's just a joke. Thank you for the laugh. I appreciate that.
Now, I was curious though, because you've had this document up on the screen. I would like to maybe.
Yeah, let me quote it. It's just a short quote. The Arian controversy. The Arian controversy sparked off by Arius, a popular Presbyterian presbyter in the Church of Alexandria. Are you seeing this? Am I looking at the wrong one here? Yeah, it's not moving, is it? Sorry, forgive me. Okay.
Yeah.
The Arian controversy sparked off by Arius, a popular presbyter in the Church of Alexandria, died 335. So what? That's right after at Constantinople, isn't it, or right before it?
It's right after Nicaea. Nicaea was 325.
I was going to say that was a decade after Nicaea and just slightly before Constantinople, about 351.
Well, I guess he wasn't condemned at Nicaea, right? He was condemned in Constantinople.
Well, Nicaea is actually very close to Constantinople. He was condemned at Nicaea.
In what sense? I didn't think they condemned
Like
anybody.
he was
positives.
deemed a heretic. He was deemed a heretic in 325 at the Council of Nicaea.
Really? Are you sure? Can
Yeah.
you give me a source on that? I thought they didn't condemn at that one. I thought they just said what they all concur on, but I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong.
Well, I think that basically they did it, take him out. And Arius was there, if I'm not mistaken. And basically,
well, he would be if he was a presbyter over at church in Alexandria. Nobody was stopping him from being a leader in the church in Alexandria. It seems that's interesting.
Yeah, and he actually continued to operate in an official capacity in the Eastern churches after his condemnation at Nicaea. And from what I understand, he didn't die as a result of persecution. I think he just died of old age. And I'm pretty sure that the emperor at the time, Constantine, kind of liked Darius and basically let him continue to serve in the church, or let him come back or something along those lines.
Well, kind of. So you're not off, but that's not 100% right either. So essentially, now when I say this, people need to understand that I am somewhat adding my opinion here in this beginning portion, but everything after this will just be straight fact. It is my opinion, and the opinion of a good many scholars as well, that Constantine's goal had nothing to do with theology. Like, he didn't seem to care a whole lot about whether or not Trinitarianism or Arianism was true. He was baptized by an Arian, and his historian, his chronicler, was Eusebius, who was a semi-Arian, and yet he also was willing to excommunicate all of the Arians after 325 when the Council of Nicaea decided that they should do so. So it really seems like his goal in calling the Council of Nicaea was pretty much to just get all the Christians to get along, so that he could have unity in his empire. And I, for one, doubt his confession, period. I don't know that I think Constantine really was a Christian. That being said, he was very sympathetic to the Arians, and immediately after excommunicating them, he reneged on that. And one of his closest advisors would remain Eusebius, who was a semi-Arian, and a separate Eusebius would actually baptize him in 337, and that separate Eusebius was a full-blown Arian. So essentially what you have happening is the Council of Nicaea condemns Arianism. The Arians get excommunicated. Arius himself gets condemned as a heretic. And then almost immediately, all of that is tossed by the wayside. And actually, for a while, the Arians themselves had power in the Roman government for roughly half a century, up until around the 380s. And there was even some persecutions levied against Trinitarians at the hands of Arians. And then that ended up flipping around 380 with, I can't remember the emperor's name. I believe it was Constantine II, but I could be wrong about that.
It's like Theodosius or something like that.
Yeah, it could also be Theodosius. I'll have to look up exactly who it was. But yeah, so it was a chaotic time. You had both sides kind of persecuting each other. A lot of people disagreeing with stuff. Arius was actually, fun fact, he was punched in the face at the Council of Nicaea by St. Nicholas, who is the self-same St. Nicholas who we now have mythologized as Santa Claus.
Oh, you know what? I should get that little meme that I've got, because everyone's familiar with the church tradition or the myth that Arius got punched out by St. Nicholas, right?
Yeah, and I think the meme you got
homoousius,
right? I've seen another one that's like deck the halls. How about deck the heretics? That was kind of funny. But regardless, the point there was that Constantine did not.
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Put me on the screen, Jamie, if you can.
But yeah, so yeah, it's the Constantine quickly reneged on his wanting to boot all of the Arians out. And
Is that Veckel? Oh wait, never mind. Is it inside joke? Never mind. Now he's black.
You don't have to keep me on the screen. The whole point was just to show.
No, you're the boss now.
Homoousius.
Word. So okay. Let's see. Let me read the quote from Arius so people can have an idea of the kinds of things he said. Because I have pretty big. Sorry, I cut myself off. I think I have a pretty big problem with this. So let me throw it back up there again. So here's what he said. He died in 335, centered on ideas expressed by him that seemed to reflect this is the opinion of an Adventist scholar, by the way. His name's Donker. I think he's African. I'll put the sources in the. It's a pamphlet on this soteriological issue, okay, and it's in the description. So, expressed ideas by him that seems to reflect the sentiments of the Antiochian school of thought. Arius, committed to the philosophically influenced Greek idea that God is undifferentiated, argued that Jesus, the Son, or Logos, had to be a creature and therefore must have had a beginning. As he put it, that is Arius himself, I believe here. What we say and think, we both have taught and continue to teach, that the Son is not unbegotten, nor part of the unbegotten in any way, nor is he derived from any substance, and before he was begotten or created or appointed or established, he did not exist, for he was not unbegotten. We are persecuted because we say that the Son has a beginning, but God is without a beginning. Arius' point of departure then is ontological, meaning that the terms like the Son should not be construed to define the essential nature of Jesus. He was not an ontological person before he was begotten by the Father to be the man Christ Jesus, right? So I think that's kind of what, I guess that's basically what you said, right, Dace, right? You agree with that statement, I suppose?
Oh, sorry. Did you ask me a question? I was interacting with the chat.
Oh yeah, I said, do you agree with the statement that Jesus? That what I just read. I guess you didn't hear it.
Here's the.
I guess you're just waiting to spew your whatever. You're not listening to the conversation. Is that what you're saying?
I am. No,
Okay.
I was listening. I'm trying to do two things. There was a conversation in the chat that I was engaging with, but I was also listening. Yeah. So basically, Arius taught that. He was part of a philosophical Greek-aligned idea, which, I mean, I think the Trinity, that's exactly what the Trinity is. But anyways, and that as a result of God, one of the qualities of God, his undifferentiation is immutability, and Jesus possessing mutability, they had to be of separate natures. And as a result, Jesus is a created being. I get.
Would you deny that the Alexandrian school would not have influence? I mean, even the Jews had Greek influence.
Oh yeah. I mean, the Greek influence of the early Christians, and I'm not necessarily saying this necessarily is reflected in the record we have, but the early Christians were heavily influenced by Greek pagan philosophical concepts. I mean, Plato, and
but so are the Jews. I mean,
no, yes, you have Philo of Alexandria, who was a Jew, right? and Philo.
I heard they were actually taken over by the Greeks. Even you guys heard that? Anybody hear that? And then the Romans, and the Jewish people. Right?
Yeah. See, the thing about Arius, I'm not sure I agree with him that Christ had like a finite beginning, like he was created ex nihilo. I guess where I agree with Arius is that
where did his soul come from? Spirit come from?
Anyway. The soul, in my opinion. See, this is the thing. These you kind of have to philosophize outside of the Bible. I'm not saying deny the Bible. I'm saying there are questions that I don't believe are clearly answered in the Bible, and this is one of them.
This is what I kind of wanted to discuss too, Ryan. I know we decided to talk about Arius, but I do want to talk about this because I think I want to make a claim here, and I want to see if you guys can defend your view or whatever. And I'm confident that you can. I don't think my view is any easier to explain. I would just say, wait, go ahead, keep going, Ace. I think you're going where I want to go with it too.
So the question is, it comes to the nature of the soul and the nature of the souls of various beings. So what is the nature of Jesus Christ's soul? I think the nature of Jesus Christ's soul is immaterial and eternal, and extends eternally in both directions, past and present. So Jesus, I don't think, actually had a beginning. So I would disagree with Arius on that point. But Jesus is still subordinate and, in a sense, inferior to the Father. Even though eternality does not...
Is that because he's human, or because the Father has an ontological personhood that the Logos does not?
Yes, the Father is ontologically authoritative over the Logos and the Son. So you will see one good example is when you see Jesus saying, "I have been given authority by the Father." You'll never see Jesus saying, "I give the Father authority." It's always Jesus receiving authority from the Father. So even though Jesus has the quality of eternality, Jesus does not have the ontological equality of authority and power of the Father.
Okay, let's let Ryan and CJ respond to that, because I would. So my view on that would just my thinking on it, and I try to be somewhat open, but I would just say my understanding would just be something like, there's all sorts of statements in the New Testament where Jesus takes on the subordinate. He's showing us how to affect to God, the transcendent God. And while he's saying it, he's a human being in some major sense. I'm not looking to say what's correct or not about that, other than to say that we all agree he became a man in some sense, right? Some more, I'd say, robust positions can be described from different perspectives, but I would take the classical or traditional idea that Jesus was fully man. But that doesn't negate the fact that he was fully God, because that's what the text indicates. So when Jesus talks those statements, I would just say he's speaking in his human capacity under that context. Like, this is how you relate to God. I'm showing you as a human how to relate to God. It doesn't negate the fact that the other statements in Scripture that suggest he's more than that. He's not a mere man. Sorry, anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, so I would say I think that the Bible is quite clear that Jesus is God. Now, it is interesting. I will admit, don't hate me for this, guys, but there is a precedent in the Church Fathers for what A's is saying, in that a lot of them did not believe that Jesus necessarily existed as is. Before a certain point in time. So to
he came forth from the Father, right? Sort of thing.
Well, not even that, right? So I'll give an example. I often like to give the example of the sun analogy because it so clearly illustrates, I think, just how different the views were back then. Because, of course, a lot of this stuff was developed over time. And by the way, when I say developed, that doesn't mean that it's scriptural or not scriptural. I think a lot of ideas that were scriptural may not have developed immediately, or even if they did develop immediately, could have been squashed very quickly. So, like, for example, it's scriptural that Mary had other children, but it seems to be pretty well accepted for most of church history that she was perpetually a virgin, even though I think there's no argument from scripture to say that, right? So,
right. In fact, that was so prevalent, by the way, that John Calvin even conceded the perpetual virginity of Mary, the perpetual virginity, that he had a problem with the Immaculate Conception, however.
Yeah, exactly, right? And so,
it's interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and I bring that up only to say that we should not be surprised to see a certain level of development in most doctrines. Now, with that being said, so there was a analogy used by two different early church writers, namely Tertullian and Sabellius. Sabellius was a modalist, so what we would today refer to as oneness, and Tertullian was actually the guy who coined the term Trinity or Trinitas, as it was in his own language, right? So I don't know if you could call him a Trinitarian per se, but a proto-Trinitarian certainly. And they both, without relation to each other, used the same analogy to describe the Spirit and the Son and their relationship to the Father. And what they said was basically, the Father is like the sun, the S-U-N, the big star in the sky, right? And the Spirit and the Son, S-O-N, are like the heat and light which emits from it. Meaning, the heat and light don't begin to exist per se, but they do emanate from the sun, the S-U-N, right? But they
like Yahweh tested by fire says.
Yeah, actually, that's actually exactly right. And to his credit, there is some precedent for that. Like I said, in that's the way
Emanation. I just meant I was kidding to give you a hard time. But yeah, it sounds like what he said.
Yeah, and so the point though is just to say that that's similar to the view that A's is articulating right now, and similar to the view that was articulated by Chris LaSala as well, if you guys remember his YouTube channel.
Oh, that crazy fellow. I didn't even know you knew about him.
Indeed. So Sabellius and Tertullian and a couple others as well. I think that Irenaeus could fall into this camp, although Irenaeus has statements that seem to go many different ways. Sometimes he writes as if he were a semi-Arian, sometimes he writes as if he were a Trinitarian, and sometimes he writes as if he were a modalist. And so I'm not really sure what Irenaeus believed. Justin Martyr seems to describe the Godhead in a similar way to this, and so on and so forth, right? It's like they have this idea that the Son and the Spirit don't necessarily begin to exist because they always exist within the Father. But at the same time, they do legitimately have a point in time in which they are begetted from the Father. And even that would carry into some of the more proto-Trinitarian theologies as well, where they would say instead of a point in time, they'd call it eternal begetting, right? Which,
yeah, the concepts may have been slightly different than how we understand it today, which can kind of fog up or muddy the waters, and and then biases kick in and stuff. Do you think? I think we should just nuke the rest of the world except for America, and then see. I knew it. He's got to collect his sticks to burn you at the stake, CJ. Just kidding. It seems like. So I do try to be somewhat tentative without trying not to be biased. I would just say charity, and just try to say what Scripture says. But look, do you think? I don't know. I forget what I was going to say, but I had a point, but I lost it. Sorry.
Well, let me say, though, too, that there is still, though, an error, I think, both in what Arius said and also what A's has said, which is that, whereas Sabellius, and Tertullian and Justin and Irenaeus and so on, they all would still concede that Jesus is Yehovah. They don't agree on necessarily how he is, and they certainly don't agree with the modern Trinitarian in how he is. Although some of them would. Theophilus of Antioch seems to have a pretty robust Trinitarian theology as far back as 180 AD. But nevertheless, they all still concede Jesus is Yehovah in the flesh, right? And Arius
wait. Is it possible? And this is a total. I have no thought in mind on what the answer to this is. Is it possible that someone could say that the Son began to exist, but that he was still Yahweh? There seems to be there is a way you could look at it and say that. I would not say that, but is it possible that just the way they were thinking about it like that, because they were thinking, well, the man Jesus didn't exist before he was born. And I mean, could they still have some idea that he was Yahweh and not think that, or I mean, they seem to be familiar
that
with
is
enough
now
of it.
a related issue called semi-Arianism, and that is a different topic.
Yeah, and I'll admit, this is all, I said earlier how I can definitely be somewhat of a squish on these issues. This is kind of why. I think, and there are many Trinitarian scholars who would actually agree with me on this. For example, Dr. James White, who wrote The Forgotten Trinity. I think that it is anachronistic to look at the pre-Nicene church fathers and say the Trinity was for sure what they were talking about. A lot of them weren't. And a lot of them, if they were certainly not articulating it in a way which would be orthodox in a modern church. And because of that...
Well, Arius was a presbyter, CJ. Again, he was a presbyter.
Well, exactly. I mean, right? He's a high-ranking member of the church. And so, and my point
No,
here
he's a Presbyterian, CJ. He's a Calvinist.
Yeah, the session has put this up to a vote, and we have decided that it is time to move forward with charges of excommunication against Arius.
Okay. Well,
but just quickly finish the point, though. This is why I was saying it's like, I don't think that these issues are as cut and dry as we like to make them out to be. I think that there are lines that need to be drawn, and Arius did cross that line when he said that Jesus Christ was not Yehovah. But beyond the acceptance that that the Father is God, the Holy Spirit is God, the Son is God, there is one God. I don't think that we can speak with any sort of, air in our chest, so to speak, about the heretical nature of these other individuals, because in the end, I think that invalidates most of the early church. In fact, it was Origen who made the claim, and Tertullian also, that the majority of the believers they were aware of were modalists. And you just pointed out Arius was a presbyter. A presbyter is a church leader, right? So it's like, it really was a developmental period. And I think that needs to be taken into account, I think, is what this whole rant is about.
yeah, that's supposed to be a joke. I guess I should be careful because I might confuse people when I do that sort of thing. Did you get my joke? I thought it was so funny. I was so proud of it. I thought I was so smart sounding when I said, I think Praise thinks semantic range is a Jewish prairie.
Yeah, I did get that.
I thought
it was
that
quite
was funny. Yeah, I thought that was pretty funny. I'm firmly convinced Praise is one of those individuals that you could smack him in the chest with the latest edition of any dictionary, and he still won't get it. Still won't get it.
It's semantic. Sorry, keep going, buddy. I needed a little boost, and I'm kind of proud of that one.
Well, no, I'm done. Anybody can comment now on what I just said.
Yeah. You have a soft spot for heretics. I think we should burn you.
CJ is a heretic. Assemble the.
I'm just joking. I think that's the right
way. The session has voted. We have concluded that you should be tried for your heresy. I mean, crimes.
We'll light A's head on fire to light the faggots that CJ's bundled with.
Well, now you've got visions of a certain somebody that wore a hood and dancing in my head, and his colorful insult.
Did you like how I left my last? If you guys see my last stream, I left everybody with Joan of Arc being burned at the stake.
I didn't see that. What I was going to say on this,
the gal from that what's her name from? Sorry, there's a lag. Williams Lane's Craig is Craig.
William Lane Craig.
No, I like one of my screen names is William Crane's Leg, LAG.
That's funny. That's funny. That is funny.
So I'm confused, Ryan. Are you saying? I think if Ryan was there, he would be leaning back in a chair at the little cafe with John Calvin as the screams from the hilltop of his of poor Servetus dying, and you'd be laughing and leaning back in the chair having your cappuccino with Calvin. No, I'm just kidding.
Actually,
but I mean, it sounds like you're kind of not
Calvin
sure about that.
We would have been rationalizing as much as we possibly could to stave off Severus being killed. And then, of course, what people fail to realize is that when Calvin recognized that the secular council was going to kill him, he tried to move for a more humane execution, realizing, well, they're going to give this man an execution that he doesn't deserve per se, although he was a terrorist by all historic accounts, as we would call it today. And the consent of all the churches, and that is to say, also the consent of most of the European governments, was that Severus ought to be dealt with accordingly. Calvin still tried to get him a more humane execution, despite all of the things that Severus attempted to do with him. But that's really here nor there in this particular discussion.
Yeah, that was a joke. I just wanted to accuse you of a more realistic. Do you think there's any precedent in any point in history? Like I'm going to be direct. Is there any point in history where it makes sense to kill heretics? I mean, I can see arguments you can make for at certain times and for reasons.
This would go into my thoughts about monarchism, because I am more in line with the English Reformed insofar as that they did not hold to the notion of a freedom of press or a freedom of the speech, because they believed that some works ought to be suppressed for the preservation of morality and good in the church. Now, that being said, that's a whole different discussion that maybe we can have another time. Briefly, on the issue of the two natures, Christ operates in his office as the mediator of the covenant of grace in two natures. A classic proof text is Luke 1 and verse 35. The angel answered and said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. For that reason also, the Holy Child will be called the Son of God." Now, that said, CJ's monologue, and I say that teasingly, CJ, is basically correct. We don't find a carbon copy or cookie cutter development of the doctrine of the Trinity as we know it today throughout the church, but all the components are definitely there.
So maybe it's appropriate to have, since we're flooded with knowledge, if anyone certainly didn't believe the Trinity now, we would be obligated to burn them at the stake now. I mean, eternal souls are on the line.
We would be obligated to reject what they are saying.
Yeah, obviously. I'm being over the top. But I mean, dude, we're talking about eternal souls here, man.
Well, Jamie, I'm trying to be serious.
I mean that seriously. I mean, think about it. If burning someone on a stake for 5 minutes to kill them and stop their the bleeding of the heresy they're spreading, and we might just save their eternal soul by doing so, why isn't that a good idea? I mean that seriously.
Because we're not saving their eternal soul, Jamie, and the whole purpose of capital punishment is really not the discussion here. Although it seems that you're itching to talk about that.
No, because I think it's related. I'm really interested in the subject of the church and state issue.
I mean, if you want to get on that subject, man, I'll be.
No, let's not. No, you're right. Let's explore
that's what I'm trying to say. I'd be happy to talk about that, but I really didn't come here to talk about.
Okay, yes. Let me go. Okay, so explain your way out of this one. Okay, and I admit I'm not saying it's a gotcha. This is just, it seems like a problem to me. Maybe I'm missing something. You think that, so I'm going to say, you stop me if I say something that misrepresents you, okay? You would agree with me that the Logos was a spiritual being and fully God and was the pre-incarnate Christ, yes?
Yes.
Okay. And I would say, yeah. So the eternal Son in his pre-incarnate form is a spirit in some sense, whatever that means, right? Non-material, perhaps, or supernatural or super.
It would be immaterial. Would be the word.
Yeah, that's fine, and that seems what the Bible says, right? So spirit is, and but that is a full person, right? It's Jesus. I mean, the pre-incarnate, eternal God man, guy that becomes the God man, who's God fully, isn't partially God. He is a person, a full person, part of the Godhead, right? Same substance, a person. Okay, so the spirit, the Logos is a spiritual being that is fully a person, one person. So when that, which is the eternal Son, takes on human flesh, and I mentioned this last night if you heard it, and I'm not, it's not a gotcha, but it just seems like an issue. It's like, look, he has to take, if you're like let's say you're a trichotomist, but it can work for dichotomy, the same issues there.
Mm-hmm.
A person is a constitution of a body, soul, and spirit. If the logos is the spirit, is a full person, and I think some people would say, some people are, I think William Lane Craig, for instance, like it's Neo-Apollinarianism because he's like, he doesn't know what to do with it. It's like, look, he's got to have a human spirit or he's not redeeming human spirits. He's got to have human flesh because he's redeeming human flesh. He's got to have all the full constitution of what makes a human to be one. So, and then there's these issues with like, well, does that mean he had two spirits? One, the logos, a full person in and of itself, and then now all these parts to make him fully human? It's like, I don't get it. It doesn't work. There's two people. They're mixing.
Well, you're overcomplicating the issue, Jamie. Again, when we start getting into those issues, we start looking at Euclideanism, Nestorianism, and other heresies that we're not really discussing beyond Arianism.
Well, I'm trying to do an intrinsic critique of, I guess, yeah, I'm jumping ahead of Arius. I'm just saying, like, how would you square that issue?
How would I square which issue? Because
you believe a human is a constitution, and that Jesus is fully human, so he had to have all the parts of a human, and you think the logos was a person in and of itself as a spiritual being, and that became human. So how do you keep from having all? How do you keep the spiritual person from being, mixed with the human? Some part of the human nature
There's no mixing because Jesus didn't change natures when he took on flesh and dwelled among us.
Okay. But so I was saying that to lead to a point. I know you don't believe that. I'm just saying, like, okay, so they don't mix. We all agree on that because now then they'd be neither God nor man. So
it would be this
the way
other
of trying to make it be one person. I guess that's why you kind of, it's like, well, there's two natures, but it's still one person. Well, did he have this?
Well, there are two natures. There are two natures, one divine and one human. The human nature came into being when Christ incarnated, and it is extant now because it is said in Acts 1 verse 8 as example that he will return as we saw him go. He left in his body, he will return in his body.
Well, I kind of want to speak about something Jamie said. I've been kind of listening and participating in the chat, but I really think it's quite simple. If Jesus is this Logos figure, which clearly we don't have the capacity to fully understand, but let's just say Jesus is the Logos. Whatever that Logos is, I think when you read the prologue of John, it kind of explains really actually what I think makes sense, which is that this Logos entered into the body of Jesus Christ, and that was the force or being that was operating during Jesus' earthly life. I don't see how that's so complicated or why it doesn't make sense.
Who wants to explain why that's a problem? I can, but I've been talking a lot, and one of you guys might be able to do it better. I would say there's issues there. What, you guys want to say anything about it?
CJ, would you like to take a stab at that?
Can you kind of say it again? I'm not really sure that
He thinks the Logos, the spiritual being of a Logos, like what we are when we die, our ghost goes free. God, the Logos, Jesus, the pre-incarnate Christ, took on a human flesh suit, and that solves the problem. There you go. Bing, bang, boom.
That the Logos took on a human flesh suit, and
and that's fine. So he's God and he's man, and everything's kosher.
So I guess there's something I must be missing, because it sounds like if that's all he's saying is that the Logos took on human flesh, then that seems to be what we believe, right?
Well, the problem is the difference here is that I don't believe the Logos is co-equal with the Father.
You think it's fully a person, though? Didn't you affirm that he was a person, that he pre-existed and is a full person in and of himself? He didn't need a human body to become a full person, after all, right?
It's not a person in the sense of a human person, but it's a person in the Trinitarian idea of a person is a being with a will, a center of consciousness, a center of awareness, the capacity to make decisions, rational choices. So the Logos in the pre-existence was a conscious, aware, intelligent being that basically, as Jesus was born, it moved into Jesus's physical body and was the operational force for Jesus's life force during his life.
Yeah, was it an upgrade for the Logos to get a human body?
The Logos probably
did he become a full person? So the issue there would be something because that kind of sounds like, well, he wasn't really a person until he took on human flesh, and that seems weird to say. I'm going to respond to that.
Well, okay, so I'm theorizing here. So I'm willing to be proven wrong either logically or empirically, whatever. But I think the Logos.
Okay, fair enough. I'll try not to bite your head off. Sorry.
Let me just. I for whatever reason, and I can't. I think that the explanation is probably the Logos can't operate on, in the physical plane unless it's inhabiting a physical body. I don't like. That's how I would look at it. It needed to become a man to fully interact with this aspect of creation.
Okay. Well, let me take a stab at what I think no one's saying, and I think Matt Slick would bring this up. It's like, okay, the problem with the Logos, spiritual Logos, just taking on so okay, now we got to, human is a spirit and a soul or whatever, however you look at it. But let's just say the spiritual side of the parts of a person like us, right, is a spiritual being, one or two parts, right, whichever view you have. Let's say it's 3 parts. It doesn't matter. This works for either way. But so the Logos is a spiritual full person, right? And so it takes on a human body, and now you got the parts that a human would have, a spirit in a body or a spirit, a soul in a body or whatever. And so, yeah, that seems fine, right? But no, it's not fine, because now Jesus doesn't have a human spirit. He has a God spirit, but he became fully man. That is, he had all the constituent parts that make up a human being, just as we are. So if you say, oh yeah, it's a human body with the Logos in it, that is not a human constitution. And so he can't redeem the human constitution that is a spirit. If you're a dualist, I'm just kind of an internal critique I'm saying here, although I don't have a full picture of how I would explain it either. But it's like, he's got to have it. I mean, the church fathers were saying, like, look, he's got to have a human rational soul, and he has to have a human spirit, and he has to have a human body. And like, they're trying to figure out how to mix that up with the fact that he was a person in and of himself as the Logos. And like, without mixing them together, because then now you got neither God nor man when you mix them together. And if you keep them separate, you got 2 persons, and Jesus was a person, a single person. He's not 2 people. So it's like, I don't see an answer that makes any sense to me, to be honest.
We have fundamentally different views of human nature and these ideas about the substance of what motivates or animates a human being. Jesus, basically, the Logos, the physical, Jesus's physical body was basically it's a flesh suit for the Logos, and the Logos is what controls it. It's what actually animates. It's what makes the decisions, sends them to the brain. When Jesus is speaking, he's speaking from the Logos. Okay. So
okay, well, but how does his sacrifice redeem the human spirit then? If he didn't even have a human spirit,
well, see, again, I don't. The premise for me is nonsensical, because I don't believe in the idea of redemption that you do, and I don't want to go there. But that's not a problem.
Right, and I don't even believe dualism per se. Although I'm like I said, I'm being cautious. I'm not trying to attack of you and say, oh, you're wrong and I'm right. I'm just saying, like, I'm doing an internal critique of what appears to me to be a problem for the dualist. But on the sense, I'm partially a dualist, right? Okay.
What is the problem? Reiterate it.
You need Jesus to be one person without mixing the parts together, so he's neither God nor man, in some sense, right? This is just how I understand it. Someone can correct me. I'm open to learning, but it's just like, look, we need to make Jesus one person, yet he has to have to retain the fact that he's deity, which, by the way, he was deity. The traditional view would be that the Logos is a person, a divine person of the Godhead. So he's a full person in the fact that he's just the Logos as before he's incarnate. So that's a whole person right there. The God person is the Logos. Okay, now you got to make him have all the constituent parts that make up a full human person. And most people believe that's a spirit, soul, and body. And those all he has to have a human version of all that, or he's not a full human. So he's not fully man if he doesn't have full human parts. Now, if you understand that the Logos is a person in and of itself, how do you make that work without having all the parts to make up two people? Or mixing them together, now it's neither God nor man.
Okay. I see.
So that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay.
I see exactly what you're saying. So you're saying there's a Logos who's a person who's inhabiting a human person, and that makes kind of like one body with two persons in it. And is that a brief summation?
That's how I understand it. Like they're looking to make a way to make look. He has to have the parts of a human to redeem humanity, but he's also a pre-existent person in and of himself. How do you make that work? I don't see how you do.
Yeah, okay, so I don't see the problem. There's no problem for me because, in my view, in
your view, he's neither God nor man. By what you described, he
he is a man. No,
spirit inside a man, and he didn't even have a human spirit, so he's neither humanity nor deity.
He's actually
sorry for being a dick.
No, you're not. You're not. I see you're trying to describe the problem that I have. And I guess how I would respond is that I don't believe in the kind of setup about what defines a human. And when we just look at Jesus, the way I see it, and I don't know if this is compatible with Christianity or not, but this is just how I theorize it. The physical body, when you look at a person, it's the physical body can't do anything. It's basically just like a slab of meat in the shape of a person, unless it's being animated by the soul. So in Jesus's case, the animating force or spirit would be the Logos. So the Logos operates through Jesus's physical body, and it gives it the soul. When we look at Jesus, the human body, that soul that comes is the Logos. So the body receives the soul of Jesus at birth, and that's where the soul comes from. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I tried to.
I've realized the time, and I'm realizing that I ought to run to bed. So you'll pardon.
Can you please give your closing remarks, or like what you would say about this? I didn't mean to.
Yes, I'm in the process of it, Jamie. If you'll permit me.
Right.
Do you see what I'm sharing?
I wanted you to know I felt bad. Okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you see what I'm sharing on the screen?
Yes, sir.
Galatians 4 and verses 1 through 7 of the 4th chapter. Now I say, as long as the heir is a child, he does not differ at all from a slave, although he is the owner of everything. But he is under guardians and managers until the date set by the father. So we too, when we were children, were held in bondage under the elementary principles of the world. But when the fullness of time came, God sent his son, born of a woman, born under the law, so that he might redeem those who were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons and as daughters. Because you are sons, God has sent the Spirit of his Son into our hearts, crying out, Abba, Father. Therefore you are no longer a slave, but a son, and if a son, then an heir through God. Now, I will simply reply to the idea of Christ being the flesh suit donned Logos by simply saying, well, we are not simply a flesh suit donned Logos, and we do not become the sons of God in that variety. I would also reply by noting 4 verses 4 and 5. Christ, when he incarnated, did not change natures, and when the Logos put on flesh, he didn't simply put on a flesh suit so he could walk around at cousin John's birthday party for you. I'm glad someone found that funny. However, that being said,
Weekend at Bernie's.
Yeah, it's like
I know what I feel now. I feel like I've been sacrilegious.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because actually that's a really good way of saying it. It's not like Jesus Christ was literally the, the AD 30 version of Weekend at Bernie's. Well, Jesus in his body did things that we cannot do. Jesus cured the blind. He healed the sick. He arose the dead. He was able to walk through walls. So it's not just a simple mere flesh suit.
The man Christ Jesus, or just the flesh suit?
Huh?
Was that the spiritual God that had a suit made of flesh, or did the man Jesus?
This is not some kind of twisted, Gundam mecha that Jesus is piloting or something. However, that being said, I need to get to many issues. I need to get to my devotions, and I need to get to my Bible reading. It is quite late. So I shall leave you in peace, and I appreciate, A's, that you have been hospitable as of yet.
Enjoy your last hour as the Roman sun goes down, and the venerable day of the sun has ended.
Well, I shall not have to look far to find anything Roman. I shall find the Catholics all around me.
Should we take on the Roman rendering of the day too, and say the day ends at midnight, or should we take the biblical view that it ends at sundown?
I shall take the view that I shall see my way out, and y'all have a pleasant day.
All right, good night. I just thought of that. That's an interesting question, because CJ, well, maybe you guys are keeping Sabbath if you render it at noon, because, or actually, no, that wouldn't work. You'd actually be even further away from the actual Sabbath, right? Too bad Roman time doesn't start the day earlier than the Hebrews do or something. Then you could have then you could say, well, by the Hebrew rendering, you know what I mean? Because the day starts at, it doesn't make any sense. So CJ, do you see the point? Do you see why? I mean, it does. I know Matt Slick would have a conniption fit if somebody said Jesus put on a flesh suit as the logos. It doesn't work for so many reasons.
I think it does work. I don't see. I think it's very simple, and it may not make sense in what is currently presented as Christian theology and soteriology.
Do you want me to make a biblical argument why it's problematic? I can if you want.
All right, tell me why the Logos can't just take on a human body and operate in it during the life of that body.
Can somebody share Bible software? No, I can do it, actually. Hold on. I got to take me a second. I got to get my the Bible verse. I think it's Hebrews, I want to say, or Romans 5. He took on human flesh, and experienced everything we do as a human. So the point is, I was making an internal critique. I'm not saying that I have the answers per se. I would just say it's difficult.
How does that that actually seems to confirm my view?
Okay, so let me ask you. You're a dualist, right? So when you die, where are you? Wherever your spirit is, right? Because
you're right. Wherever the spirit goes, I'll be there.
Okay, so I'll be there. I'll be there. Just call my name. Sorry. And so, okay, so you are your spirit, right? So where was is Jesus, if Jesus redeems us as a human, but it's just a flesh suit, are you just a flesh suit? Jesus is the spiritual part of Jesus' pre-incarnate existence was the Logos. So right. He never actually became a human if he didn't have a human spirit and or a human soul. So you can't just say well, he's half human and half. You're basically saying he's half human and half God, and so he's certainly not a human.
No. He's fully. Unless again,
look, I'm fully human. No, you explained earlier that your dead body has nothing to do with being human. It's merely a, what you said.
Well, it does because for you to be human, you need
your mind. Are you changing your mind from?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not. For you to be human, you need a human body, but that's not the permanent aspect of yourself.
It's sure, yes. Aquinas said that it's necessary for you, and that's kind of the point, though. But it's not. You're not. Your humanity is not merely. That's what you argued earlier. Very strongly.
It's a temporary aspect of our eternal selves. So the human body.
So you are your body, but you're real. But depending on what argument someone's making. So you are your body, but you also are actually your spirit. It just depends on what someone's arguing. So you can bait and switch. Sorry, I'm just trying to.
No, you can't be a human without a human body, But the
Agreed.
human body is not the totality of one's being. So it's just one
Agreed.
aspect. Okay, so the spirit, as I see it in a dualist sense, is independent and not contingent upon the physical body. So theoretically, it can exist before and after the physical body.
CJ, help me out here. I'm not getting through. It seems obvious to me. You just said the human body is a needed aspect of your humanity, but in and of itself. So Jesus didn't take on full humanity then. He just took on an aspect of it. How does that work for the kinsman redeemer?
He took on a physical body because he needed to become a human. But before Jesus existed, he was basically everything he was except for a human body. So he wasn't a human. When he entered the body,
so human is purely defined by the fact that some kind of ghost in the shell animates the body, and therefore it's human. Just that by itself. That's
right.
Kind of what you say.
Yes, okay. Yes. I think that adequately describes. I mean, not.
Okay, so you certainly don't believe that an entirety of a person exists without their body, then. So you need a body to be a full human.
Yeah, you need a full body to be a human, but your eternal
Except if you're God. Unless you're God.
Well, God is not a human.
Right, but he didn't become more of a person when he took on a body than he already was, obviously, right? I don't. That's not Bruce, right?
Basically, just the way I look at it is to exist on the earth. Our spirit and soul is immaterial. So
Agreed.
It can't.
Again, I'm doing an internal critique. I
understand.
I'm a physicist. I want to make that clear to the audience.
No, you're doing good. You're steel manning me. You're trying. That's fine. That's good actually, because it makes me think and make sure that I'm being logical and consistent.
Yeah, and I'm being passionate and interruptive, and I apologize.
Honestly, no. This is fine. I'm just trying to figure out the best words to articulate my position, which is not easy because I don't often discuss this. But all right, and maybe this will be my closing statement. And I'm sure I'm not going to resolve all the questions that are being posed to me in a minute or two. But when we're just looking so there's Jesus and then there's the rest of humanity. And I think actually both operate on the same principle, with Jesus's soul or spirit or whatever you call it being, special or whatever you want to call it, unique to serve the role of the Messiah on earth, whereas everyone else's soul is not fit for that service for whatever reason. If God made them that way, or we don't really know why. But what happens with Jesus is he was the pre-existent Messiah, Logos, Word of God, whatever you want to call it. He entered into a physical body, and that gave him humanity so that he could participate and be the human Messiah. And when he died, his Logos soul went back to wherever the Logos soul stays. So that's just my view. And if you can, I'll leave and you can critique it and talk about why it may be right or wrong. And that's fine. That's what your show is about. It's not insulting to me. It's just, you're thinking about it and thinking about why it might be right or wrong. That's fine. So, but I'll leave with that, and maybe I give some people something to think about. All right. Sure. Goodbye. Thank you.
Yeah, good having you, man. CJ, what are your thoughts? Are you there, buddy? Are you busy?
Yeah, I am. I've just been kind of listening, taking it all in and stuff like that.
Do you see what I'm trying to say, though? Like, I'm not saying I have it all right. This is just what I remember from talking to Matt Slick, from reading about it. Like, there's the dualists tell me there's a problem with the things that I hear people say all the time, like Matt Slick especially. Like, it surprised me too, and it's possible that I get this wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is how he said it, because there was other people in the room, and I was like, well, because I was kind of like, that's the most people kind of say what Ace was saying, and it seems like that should work or whatever. But there's issues like, and you can see this in the church father writings. If you listen to what I read last night, it's pretty. There's quite a lot of good information in there, right? Regarding what the issues were with Nestorius and Apollinarian and Eutychianism and all that stuff. And he made some good points about soteriology and how it relates to the nature of Christ. And people don't often speak in those terms, but that's really what's deciding what was heresy or not, was the soteriological question, that is how Christ redeems us. And that's where this issue comes up with I think anybody who watches that video and listens to it will be pleased with what the information is there. But I think it kind of helps frame this. It's like the way Christ redeemed us as the kinsman redeemer, as the, like what we talked about on my show when you that last time we talked, and we brought up the Pelagianism one or whatever, and it was like, well, how does Christ, how is he the new Adam? Well, he became a new Adam. It certainly is a minimal point of reference, right? And so that seems to require that you're not a human if you don't have all the necessary parts of being. I say it again. If you don't have whatever you think a human constitution is, Jesus had to have all that to redeem all that in us. And so he doesn't just redeem the body, he redeems the whole person. And he has to do that by becoming the new Adam, which is the full human. That's why, like, there's arguments about, well, did he have the fallen flesh of Adam, like the pre-fall or the post-fall? And there's arguments for both that are fairly decent, in my opinion. I lean that Jesus had the fallen flesh, but there's reasons not to think that. I'm not tied to either view, like where I'm just like, I have to defend it. Adventists still fight over it. And there's arguments, but watch that video if you're interested in it. It's pretty good. But I imagine you would, like, I know Kevin, for instance, falls heavily on the side that Jesus had probably an unfallen flesh. And that, I mean, he seems to almost not even care if Jesus is human, and I'm exaggerating, but like I think people are often confused about this. They just want to make sure Jesus is God, so they don't think about his humanity enough, which is very historically important because of what Scripture says. So I mean, anybody could drop the emphasis on the humanity part of it, but I wouldn't, because of what Scripture says, like in Romans 5 and Hebrews here and there or whatever, 1 Corinthians. So I don't know. Maybe we could look at verses or whatever. I mean, do you not see there's a problem, that I'm making a problem out of nothing, or what would you say? I don't think ultimately.
I do tend to think that this issue is somewhat overblown. It seems to me to be reminiscent of.
I know it's worse than the investigative judgment, for goodness sake. No, sorry.
Well, so this is something that everybody was talking about back in the 5th century, right? You have the Monophysites and Eutychians and Apollinarians and Nestorians and yada 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 yada. You know what I mean?
Monophysites, whatever.
Yeah, and
Palmatomites.
If I'm being very honest with you, I almost don't care, because it's like, first off, the Bible just doesn't say definitively what exactly it means. So it's like Jesus is fully man, but what exactly constitutes somebody who's fully man? I mean, I don't know. You know what I mean? And I don't think that it's a matter of fellowship if you do or don't know. You know what I mean? Like, it just seems like such a bizarre thing to fight about.
I agree with that. I totally agree with you, and that I've told you that. I just the only reason I'll put it this way: it matters if only if there is a die-hard argument that I can beat the satanic immortality of the soul out of people, and or if it destroys dualism, then it really matters. But if I can't do that, then it certainly doesn't matter. Hardy har har, right?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. But and here's the other thing too. It's like, I think that, so like, for example, when it comes to the aspect of like soul, right? So I just pointed out to a certain extent, I don't really care, right? That being said, do I have views on it despite my not caring so much, right? And I mean, I guess I do. I think, like, so for example, we could ask the question, does Jesus have a human soul? That's a weird question, for sure. Because if he did, then does that, if it's a human soul, does it need redeeming? And if so, what's doing the redeeming? I guess that would kind of fit with the whole ritual that the high priest does during Yom Kippur, right?
I think a soul should be ultimately understood as just like being alive. And if you become a human and you're alive, I mean, I think there's some answers that could be made there, maybe some problems too. But like, because the Bible talks about a spirit giving life to a body, and then it says you are a soul. So it seems like my view is right, or some form of essentially Aquinas is right, where he's like, well, you are a soul, but but there's more to it than that. I would just take a really strict reading of what the Bible seems to flat out say. Animals are souls. We're souls. It just means living creatures that breathe. And so God animated a physical body, and he is life, and he gave us some of that, and animated it and made us alive by his power of being like life, essentially, right, in some sense. And so soul isn't really an ontological thing other than that you are an entity that's alive. So that's why I like my view. But at least Aquinas said something like, well, you are a soul. So they're kind of like, he's kind of having his cake and eating it too, if you ask me. But I probably don't understand it quite right. But so I don't know. Yeah. What would it mean for Jesus to have a human soul? Is that and then you might ask me, well, what's the difference? Was his soul any less human when he was a person who was alive in heaven before becoming a human? We can't really say that was a human life. But like, if there's no soul, then yeah, it's weird. It's complicated.
Yeah, and it's like, well, and that's one of the reasons too. Like, people get on William Lane Craig for being Neo-Apollinarian. It's like, I have my issues with William Lane Craig. That's not one of them, because like, I mean, it's like you try and give me a consistent answer that doesn't fall into some, something that I can poke holes into. Actually, to give another example of that, something I care a little bit more about, the question of physicalism versus dualism, right? I am definitely a dualist. And at the same time, I don't think that people will say, well, physicalism is heretical. It's like, well, I mean, that's dumb, honestly. Like, it's stupid. I don't mean to be rude to anybody, but it's like, that's just a stupid position to hold.
Yeah, because you know what I would say, and this is kind of like what kind of points I try to make with people, and sometimes I do bad because I turn into a little monster like they do, or how they make me feel. It's like, okay, if I'm going to take if you think I'm I don't mean to harp on this, but it's like, if I'm a heretic and you're showing me the right way to deal with bad doctrine, and I turn that to you, I'm going, okay, I'll adopt your attitude. Okay, I think you are a heretic because you think you're a little god that has immortality imbued in yourself before you're even redeemed. So like, your soul goes on living after you die. It's like let me be over the top with you then, but I don't want to go there. But so I don't know, CJ, help me out here. What's my problem? I think too much.
No, I just think that these issues are to a certain extent things that are, I mean, there's a wide range of issues that you're allowed to disagree on and still be considered members of the same faith, I think. Now, I understand some of the concerns. For example, Glenn Peoples, he's made the claim that that the son was
God died
completely and totally dead for 3 days. And that makes absolutely no sense to me at all. I don't know how. Well, I don't see how God could
so
be.
You believe, so wait a minute, but CJ, are you saying it? That sounds like to me, to be honest. I know what the issues are, but to me, it sounds like you guys should be like accepting of the Muslims, because they say like, God made it appear that he died, but he really, let's say, teleported to heaven. His spirit, which was, by the way, a full person already before he even took on human flesh. And so he literally just teleported from one place to another. I mean, to me, it's like, yeah, I guess it appeared that he died, but I mean, it actually was probably a release. He was naked on a cross. He got to escape. I mean, did he die or not?
The reason that doesn't really work is because that's a uniquely physicalist response, if I may. Because
I'm kind of mixing views, I guess.
Yeah, well, not to be rude, but yeah, exactly. Because from the perspective of a dualist, when the human person dies physically, the human person is not yet entirely extinguished, right? It's mostly extinguished, or maybe
You mean like their body dies?
well, that's even that because that's not 100% accurate. You know, dualism is a view that means we have to be constituted by both, right? So if a dualist is saying we are our spirit and not our body, then they're not a dualist. That's a form of monism.
Okay, yeah, well, good, because I don't think when Jesus died, he stopped existing. His body certainly was there.
Well, and even that, though, is not even quite what I'm getting at, right? Because if you were to say he stopped existing, meaning his body was still there, that well, it just doesn't seem like it makes sense to say that's existence per se. Like if I say, does George Washington exist? It's a weird question because he certainly did.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But now that's a good point. But what about the fact that like it emphasizes seems to be kind of an important detail that his body didn't see corruption. Why? What is the point of that? How do you think about that?
I think it refers specifically to sin. Like I don't think he never caught a cold. You know what I mean?
You don't think it has to do with the length that he was dead? His body was dead. You don't think it has to do with like literally decay sort of thing?
Well, I mean, rigor mortis sets in after like 4 hours, so
right.
I don't know.
Yeah. So you think that's a mistake? Because I mean, I think people say like a lot of different scholars have talked about this. Like Lazarus went past the time of what they understood to be when you really start to stink or something. I don't know what exactly the criteria was for why they came up with that time length, but it seemed like they had something. The 3 days and his body not seeing corruption seem to be related, don't you think? Or do you take a different view?
I mean, I guess I've never
thought about it
was important, so maybe I'd have. But I mean, I don't know. I would doubt that his body was rotting or anything like that. But I would imagine that has more to do with miracle than it does the actual time, because rigor mortis sets in very quickly. In fact,
cell death and all that. Yeah.
And I saw my cat living at 4 a.m. And by 5 a.m. excuse me, he'd passed, and by 10:11 he was already hard and cold.
Yes, it's like a different substance, you know.
So like,
I know
it's like that whole process sets in very, very quickly. So if anything, it would have to be somewhat miraculous. However, with that being said, set that to a side moment to get back to that issue we were just discussing, right? From the perspective of a dualist, which bear in mind that means made up of both substances, right? We are not strictly our spirit, we are not strictly our body. So when a human person dies on a dualist view, that means that the person is essentially partially extinguished, but not entirely, right? So if Jesus is partially extinguished, but not entirely, he's still suffering the exact same death that we would suffer, right? While also not having the issue of the son is literally non-existent for some period of time, or he's dead, or he's unconscious, or whatever it happens to be, right? On the other side, though, you can't actually do that. On the other side, in order for Jesus to die, as you know, from a physicalist worldview, that means he is completely extinguished. Now, you still maintain the fact that we both die in the same sense, because you are accepting physicalism for the human person, right?
Well, what do you mean by extinguished, though? Like, I would just say, if you mean by extinguished that he was annihilated, I certainly don't. No one believes that. That's annihilation.
No, because that's the second death, right? So,
right.
By extinguished, I would mean that there is no sense. So, you know, let's say,
I guess Jesus didn't actually substitute us for the second death. Then that's an issue that keeps cropping up in my mind. Like, if he didn't suffer in the second death in some sense, either the second and first death are ontologically the same thing. It's just dying a second time, or Jesus didn't actually die the second death. And if he's our substitute and he only died the first death, we still die the first death. So in what way is he a substitute? See, this is an issue. I don't saying I have an answer. My view is better because I have an answer. I don't know what to make of that. Does that ever cross your mind?
Well, I guess no, because I guess I don't know if it necessarily. Here's the thing. I think a lot of these problems are just not really problems. Like just as an example.
But Jesus died in my place. But if he only died the first death and we all still died the first death, in what way did he take the punishment for sin? Well, the punishment for the sin is the second death. Well, he didn't die the second death. How is he a substitute? What's your answer?
Well, I think the penalty for sin is ultimately just death, period.
Just death proper, right?
Yeah. Now, when one says, yes, but we already experienced death, it's like, okay, that's true, but it is ultimately temporary. And in an ultimate sense, we don't experience death any more than, what would be a good example, I guess, or hunger, right? So, like, in other words, we're not permanently hungry. There's food at the end.
Do you eat spirit? Do you think you eat spirit food when you're a spirit in the intermediate state? Do you think you have spirit Nikes or spirit clothes, or do you think you're in a form that's like your form now, or is it totally just not even it seems weird to say it's like absolutely not three-dimensional in some sense anyway. What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. I think that could be a distraction, to be honest with you. Because
I'm just curious. Sorry. It has nothing to do. I'm not trying to trap you or anything. It's weird. Well, sorry, keep going. What were you saying? I have a million questions, so I'll just shut up and let you finish here.
Well, the point I'm trying to get at here is that when it comes to the issue with physical, and bear in mind, I'm not saying that physicalists aren't Christians, but the error I see, right, is so from a physicalist perspective, when a human person dies, a human person is completely extinguished. That is to say, completely dead, totally and absolutely dead, right? From a dualist perspective, that's not true.
I guess. I kind of want to say that depends on what you mean. Because I think, like, I would say as I was dying and I thought I was a Christian and I loved God, I would say, into your hands I commit my spirit. So what does that mean? I don't think we literally fly off as a ghost and God's holding us in his hand, but I do think it means my essence is in God's hands, and then he's going to put that back in a body one day, and then I'll be alive again. So there's a sense where I want to like come up with a better, like more detailed explanation, because it's like, no, I don't think you're like, and I know that we don't say you were annihilated at the first death, but yeah, you're right. What's the right language there? I mean, did Jesus literally preach to did he have to go down there, like fly down there and like stand there in front of the spirits within a certain range to qualify to actually have preached to the spirits? Like, how literal do we take that? Same thing with death. It's like, no, I don't think I cease to exist in that sense. I just cease to be conscious. But what it is that I am is in God's, I don't know, memory bank or whatever, or on hold in God's mind or something. What's so bad about that?
Well, I think the big problem with what you just explained there is that it seems to me to be dualistic. If God, in some senses, even if it's sleeping, Martin Luther believed in soul sleep, but he was a dualist, right? So even if
that sounds like dualism.
Say again?
Do you think Martin Luther was a dualist? Soul sleep to me, I don't even like that word, because look, it's not even really about dualism to me. It's really about what does the Bible say about the nature of death in the intermediate state. Like, I don't even have to be a physicalist. I mean, there's a sense where I kind of want to say, like, and I've kind of learned actually, that Adventists don't necessarily always say they're physicalists, by the way, because of this issue. Like, some of them have whatever that weak form of dualism is, I think, actually. And I think I might be confused on that, but in other words, I'm not a substance dualist for humanity, but I don't think we're merely our bodies. I'm not a naturalist. So it's like, there's a sense where I think you're more than your stupid body, because I know you're going to have a different body when you're resurrected. So there's just like, I don't know, I kind of think of it like a pattern of action or something that constitutes who you are. I don't know, you know what I mean? I don't know. Maybe you can help me figure that out.
Well, so as far as the constitution of human persons, there's only the options of physicalism and dualism, right? And to be very clear, because it seems like you're getting this caught up with a whole bunch of other issues, which, while related, are ultimately separate. And what I mean by related but separate is like for example, when Ryan was bringing up monarchism and religious liberty. Certainly, we can see why he associates the two. Certainly, they're not completely detached, but they are separate in so much as that you can believe in religious liberty and be a monarchist, right? So that's the same thing we have going on right here. You can accept that there is no intermediate state of consciousness, and that annihilation is true, and that dualism is true. You're right. All three of there's no incompatibility with each other there. Just because you don't typically see it worded that way doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And in fact,
Yeah, sure.
I think you'd be able to see examples of people who would accept various states there, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
certainly,
when we're talking about the issue of dualism versus physicalism, we're talking about strictly what makes and narrowing it down to anthropology, right? Because we're not talking about the existence of spiritual beings per se. We're asking the question: are we, in some sense, spiritual beings, right?
Sure.
So you're only asking the very strict question: is humanity made up of one substance, i.e., material, or two substances, i.e., material and spirit? Spirit as traditionally defined, of course, because it's not simply being alive or aliveness, if you will, but that there is some sort of like I said, substance that is actually spiritually powering us, right? And in that sense, the kind of stuff that you were just arguing is compatible with a dualist view, but it's not compatible with a physicalist view. So, for example, your essence goes back to God. What is an essence if not an immaterial part of your being, i.e., spirit? Right?
Well, yeah. Okay. So, do you think that's why Christian physicalist scholars are always making these weird arguments about the particulates of the body that have to be involved with the new body when God raises you from the dead? I think that seems dumb.
I do too.
Really
but I do think you're onto something that's part of there. Or I also think that's why Glenn Peoples says straight up that God died in so much as that he ceased to be for a temporary moment in time, specifically the Son, right? Because that's the consistent physicalist understanding. If you're only made up of the one substance, i.e. physical, and the physical has been extinguished, then you are extinguished, right?
But here's something I wanted to say about that. Like, I identify as a physicalist. I think we're made up of one substance, but I'm kind of like exploring like what I'd actually have to give up if I accepted this or that or whatever, right? Like look, ultimately, like at the end of the day, I don't know. I'm just saying I think the Bible's saying this, and this is why. And I don't think, I don't know. I see the different issues. Just like depends on who I'm listening to more. It's just like, because look, my first intuition is that you guys are like saying Jesus didn't really die, but of course I understand that it's because I believe death is a certain thing, and so like one of us is wrong. It's a quote unquote historical heresy, like as it for what it's messing up or whatever, according to what people call heresies or whatever. But I'm not so inclined to. I'm not that worried about it, I guess. Other than that, you guys think you're little gods that live on, intrinsically by your own given gift of God, and that Jesus didn't really die. That sounds really awful to me. But I get what you could say back to me. Oh, you think God can die? You think, there's a problem. There can't be a resurrection if we don't have an intermediate state and continuity of personhood and all these issues or whatever. And they're good questions. So I don't know. It just seems like the Bible's saying dead people aren't alive, and that Jesus actually died, and that death is defined from Genesis. And so, but
the thing about that though is both of those things I think are true. But in order to take issue with those things, it seems to me like you have to smuggle in a physicalist perspective, because
I don't. What do you mean smuggle it in? At what point, and what do you mean by that?
So you say that dead people aren't alive. And it seems like you take aliveness deadness, to be not just ceasing of consciousness, but ceasing of existence, even if it is for a temporary period of time, right?
Right.
And then,
yeah, I mean, it's obviously circular reasoning in a sense, but it's supposed to be shorthand to just be like make people think.
No, but the reason that's important is because so then when we say, so you believe that Jesus didn't die, but that's we only believe Jesus didn't die on a physicalist view.
Like I believe Jesus. Like I believe death.
Exists.
Yes, of course.
Yeah. But if you take a dualistic view, which is to say that when the human person dies, the spirit has not yet been extinguished, then we believe that Jesus did die. His flesh died.
Of course. By your definition. Yes. Of course, yes, absolutely. And so let me clarify. Let me be straight. I understand that when I say dead people aren't alive, it's not an argument. Okay. There's no argument there. I'm not like saying, oh, look, I'm proving to you that, I'm not thinking I'm actually like making an argument that like is convincing someone because I'm making a biblical point. I know that you believe death is defined differently. Of course. It's kind of just, I'm aware that I'm using my definition of death there and that you have a different definition, of course. Yes. So let me be clear on that. It's kind of I don't know, a quip or whatever. I'm just saying like, think about this. Like, what is the Bible actually saying about life and death? I want people to think about that. Because I think what's intuitively clear to me is that people are kind of giving it's not a biblical precedent. You don't argue back from Christology, in my opinion. You can make a case for that, I suppose, but it seems like God tells us what life and death is, and then then we start at the beginning, and then you come to Jesus, who becomes a man, who God has established by his word what a man is, what life and death is from there. And it seems to me that the way you guys define it, you're like back reading Paul's non-literal language about spirits, or you can argue that it's coming in from outside, ideas or whatever. I don't really care which. I'm just saying, like, what is the Bible actually trying to say that's coherent? And I just seems like, the language of taking away the tree of life so you don't live forever. Well, if you're going on thinking, that's where sin rests. The acts of sin come from the mind of man, like what he decides to do and what his desires are. So like, what does it even mean to take away life, ongoing life, by taking away the tree of life? So it seems like that's because he doesn't want sinners living forever, because it wouldn't be a happy place or whatever. So until he deals with it, he would take away your ability to sin at a certain point, right? He's like he numbers your days. I don't know why else he would do it.
So this is why I say it's important to remember that dualism it's kind of funny because it reminds me of compatibilism in a sense, in that this is a clarification that needs made. Dualism is inherently opposed to monism to such an extent that a consistent dualist must affirm that a human person is made up of both. What that means as it pertains to your objection is that a human person who is spirit only is not in any sense truly a human person, right? It's a broken person. It's a car without gasoline, or gas without a car to put it in. You know what I mean? So when we are resurrected, we will again be both spiritual and physical.
Yes, and in a fullness of your intended being.
Exactly.
Right.
So
yes, and that's reflected in the church fathers too, what you're talking about here, by the way. I just want to point that out.
Exactly.
They certainly are aware of this issue, yes.
So whatever the intermediate state is, whether it's unconscious or conscious, it's in some sense lacking, right? That you're not a completed human person in that intermediate state, right?
Sure, yeah, I definitely know you. That is what the people who believe this view in church history that were intelligent, they're certainly aware of this from the very beginning, yeah.
Yeah, and to be fair to you, I know why you make the objection that you do, because a lot of dualists seems to suggest that we really they're monists, but they're monists from the other perspective, right? They believe that we're actually inherently spirit beings rather than physical beings.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a great way to put it. And you know what? I think that is the issue of the Gnosticism that the Gnostics
actually, yeah, that's 100% right. That's what the Gnostics believed. In fact, Docetism famously believed that Jesus could not have possibly been truly flesh because flesh was apparently corrupt.
Yeah, good point. That's interesting. I'm going to explore that some more because it's like, that has implications too for the subject matter. I know we've gone all over the place here, but mostly because of me. But do you think, a bad Yahweh gave us these darn bodies that are so evil, if only our spirits that are ontologically like Christ from the beginning could be set free. After all, my spirit is totally redeemed no matter what I do, and my body is what the problem is. There's a lot of Christians that say weird stuff like that, where it's like, I don't even want to go to heaven if I have to have a physical body again.
And I think that's a total misunderstanding.
Me too.
Because Paul talks about our flesh. I think Paul is using the flesh as a metaphor. He's not talking about your literal flesh versus your spirit. I think he's essentially using shorthand for this earth that we're on by saying the flesh.
Yeah, the flesh is like your propensities and desires for sin.
Exactly.
Through the fallen nature that is associated with your mortal body that you inherited from Adam, something like that.
I would even go as far as to say every time that Paul uses the word the flesh, I think you could substitute the word carnality and you would understand it clearly.
Absolutely. That's always been my understanding in the sense. There's a few verses that it's hard to untangle a little bit, perhaps, and people could take different views. But yeah, he's just saying like, because of what he develops in Corinthians, it's like he clearly makes that in Romans 5 and in all sorts of places. We're redeemed from the curse of the law. There's all sorts of different ways you can go with developing theology out of that. It's very interesting,
Absolutely. Hey, really quickly, I will continue, but Yahoo and Crimson Air have both asked for the link.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Here, sorry guys if I missed that.
No, you're totally
I'm trying to make CJ look dumb. It's not working. No, I'm just kidding. Well, look, dude, I guess it's the conversation. Like, what exactly are we trying to argue for here? Like, do you think we should argue from Christology backwards and say, well, do you think there's text that suggests Christ was conscious? Like, what would you appeal to? Like when he was dead, do you think that's
I think it's
necessary. The one about it. Yeah, which one? Sorry, you're cutting out and I'm lagging or something. I'll try to pause after I say something longer.
No, that's all right. So I believe it is in Peter where the claim is made that Jesus somehow witnessed to lost souls in hell while he was in the grave. And that to me implies that he was conscious while in the grave. It doesn't necessarily imply I get sort of iffy about whether or not that implies that we are conscious while in the grave, because depending on what exactly the Bible means to communicate by hell, I think that a lot of people think Hades is strictly the abode of the dead. I don't think that works, because Jesus uses Hades to describe the place where the damned go over and against the place where those who are saved go. And one of the famous examples being Capernaum. He says, Capernaum, you will not be going, ascending. How does he say it exactly? Ascending to heaven, I think. But rather, you will be brought down low to Hades.
I think that's a kind of a quote of like Isaiah, where they'll be brought down to the pit. All the kings and the mighty men will be brought low to, and God talks about. I think some of those are idioms too, or perhaps they're idioms. It's like, how literally do you want to take it? I hear you. Because are they quoting it as the idioms just to be like appealing to the fact of what God's going to accomplish, or are they giving us more of like what I guess you call it ontological definition or a description or something? I don't even know if I'm using the word right, but like, what are they intending to? What is their emphasis? Of what they're intending to tell you? I would want to argue that they're really talking about, hey, look, some people, everybody's going to the grave, and once you go there, it's over. And so now I'm going to express that culturally. We have a different way of looking at it. And so it seems a certain way to us, I think, or, commonly anyways, I think I'm right about it. But in other words, even the early church fathers, I think, got it wrong. But I would want to argue, and it gets a little sketchy at times, but I think any of the views do. But it's like, look, the reason they said stuff like that, and Jesus used that in the parable, is he's just saying like, and we're Protestants, so we believe like, after death, it's a judgment. So we're strong on that, right? Because of all the nonsense that comes out of not understanding that. And there's biblical evidence to say that. So we say like, look, so I'm saying, yeah, of course, because when you die, it's over. And after that, the judgment on the last day, well, some people are going to be held for that good place. Some people are screwed. They're going to that bad place. And so it's just like a way of culturally describing it. Because you see that a lot. I mean, I don't know. It just, like, I'd also point to, it was so weird because Heiser said this, and to me, he was arguing against my position, and he makes this argument. To me, it's like, this argues for my position. Like, it's like, look, the Hebrews were surrounded by cultures that were wrong, and the Bible's right. They said all sorts of stuff like, oh, when you die, you're set free and you fly off to heaven and you go off to the good place or whatever. It's like, is the Bible really trying to communicate that? Like, what's with this resurrection thing? How do you put that all together? There's one other thing I wanted to throw an argument at you was that, actually, you know what? I'm going to pause there and let you think about it, or let you ask me something finish what you were saying, because I want to say this right. It was a verse.
So with everything there being established about, the having to take death on each view as it is given on that view, and also how dualism proper means that we are constituted of both. We cannot be one or the other, right? Now, with that information, asking the question, which view seems less biblically problematic? I won't say heretical, because I think people go too far when they say Glenn Peoples is a heretic.
I'm honestly leaning towards, I'm worried that you guys are in danger of Jesus not actually being our substitute by dying like we're supposed to die, like what death means. But I mean, it depends. I don't know. I can make a case the other way around. Like, whoever is wrong is wrong. But then you could say, well, no, we both believe that Jesus died for our sins. And, it's kind of like the Daniel 70 thing. It's like, seems to me like a defeater. You probably feel the same way about this view. Like, dude, you're literally like blaspheming God by saying the God man, like, suffered the second death or something. And like, in the sense of the nature of it or something. And I'm like, well, I don't know. I go ahead and make your argument why I'm a heretic. That's fine.
Well, no, again, I want to be clear. I don't think either side is being heretical here. I think that, well, I'm
not irritated or anything. I would just think, show me why I'm a heretic. And I mean that like, haha, whatever. Like, what's the problem? I'm not but flustered.
I think it's important to phrase it correctly, though. It's not a matter of heresy or not. It's a matter of which one is problematic, right? I would say like this. You could similarly, you could label this similarly to the way we talk about me and you. I mean, talk about conditionalism, right? Where it's like, I see where others are coming from in thinking that conditionalism is dangerous, but I don't think we can go as far as to say it's heretical, because that seems to me to be unfair to what people are actually claiming, and also making a claim that the Bible doesn't actually make, right? So I do want to phrase it correctly in that sense. With that said,
it's tempting though, right?
Oh, certainly. With that being said, though, so on one view, now, again, let's establish on both views, Jesus died as death is defined on that view, right? So both views.
Why aren't they coming in? Did I not get the link to them, or what? Did it not go in?
No, I do see it there.
Here it is again. Why. You can join. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
So
I won't do that again. So for both views, we're both affirming the things the Bible says from our perspective, right?
Exactly. Both views affirm that Jesus died as death is defined on on their own respective views, right? So on the one view, since humans die only partially at the first death and don't die totally until the second death. And even that, I will have to say, asterisk, because people debate about eternal conscious torment versus annihilation. I'm going to assume my own argument of annihilation. So we're going to say that people do completely and totally die at the second death, which is what I think Scripture teaches. And I think.
Are you feeling pressured to reject that or to abandon that obviously completely biblical truth which the other view has no support for whatsoever in the entire Bible?
Not even close.
Okay, good.
I don't think. I think that I do believe in conscious torment. I think that eternal conscious torment is. I think it has very little to no scriptural basis whatsoever, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I think it's bumptious chicanery.
I've heard that before. So back to the point. So on the one view, humans die partially, meaning that the physical dies, but the spiritual has not yet been destroyed. And Jesus dies in that same way. He physically died, his spiritual was not destroyed, which in the case of spiritual Christ, I think that would be more like saying the human nature is dead. And I guess it's not 100% true, but nevertheless, in some sense, that it means that the God nature would not be dying. I guess it doesn't mean entirely that the human nature dies per se, but the God nature would not be impacted by that, right? Right. On the other view, since physicalism kills the entire person, that would mean that the entire person that is the Son would be dead, which is why, and I think Glenn Peoples is consistent. I think he's very, very wrong, but he is consistent when he says that not only that God died, but that the Trinity was in some sense handicapped during that 3-day period, or I guess technically it wouldn't be 72 hours, but nevertheless.
So you don't believe God died, obviously, then. In no sense did God die to you, then. Just the humanity portion of Jesus taking on humanity. His humanity died. God didn't die. Nothing about what made him God died, then.
Well, not only do I think that the God nature could not have died, but I don't think it's possible, because it violates certain elements of God's nature in ways which I think are irreconcilable. So, for example, God is immutable, which means he does not change. He says so numerous times, Numbers 23:19, Hebrews 8, so on and so forth, right? It's not Hebrews 8, it's Hebrews 12. Anyways, so death, by definition, is mutability. So if Jesus Christ can die, Numbers 23:19 is not true, just flatly.
CJ, right? But that means some flesh suit died for your sins. The person who is God didn't die. His avatar died.
Remember, he died in the same sense that I'll die. So that doesn't actually work unless.
Who are you? Wait, who's that? Who's that died for you?
What do you mean?
Was it the body of Jesus that died for you, or the person?
No, it would be the person, right? But again, it's that person is dying in the same sense that I'm dying. And when I die on the dualist view, there is still a part of me which has not yet been destroyed, right?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. It just seems so weird because, like, the divine logo, nothing happened to the divine logos. I mean, he just put on a suit, and then stuff happened to the suit, and it was actually kind of set free. I got to develop what I'm trying to say better. I'm just saying, like, that person, everything about the person who was God, fully a person. I need to figure out how to say this better, but it's like the issue there is like that doesn't make the person one. It seems like that is even supporting this idea that there's two persons, because it's like nothing happened to the full person that existed before Jesus did. That is the same person as Jesus, and then that full person took on humanity. It's almost like it's untouchable. Like he didn't really take on being human. I mean, that thing was just, in that sense, it's an avatar. I guess I need to think about how to word it better, but I'm just saying, like, it just seems like.
Well, I think if I may be bold, it's not so much that you need to think about how to word it better. It's that you have to try to find a way to divorce your understanding of death from an internal critique of dualism. Because
I mean, yeah, well, in a sense, yeah, but like the divine person who is Jesus before he was born, the Son, nothing about that person suffered anything.
well, I
I
don't
mean,
know. I don't think that's true because he was certainly that divine person is the human being that was Jesus Christ, right? He was legitimately incarnate, and he
yeah,
did.
okay, fine. Well, let me just kind of try to clarify what I'm saying a little bit better, because I'm not saying it's not that I don't get that the different views of death are going. I'm not like accidentally doing that. Yeah, and in some sense, I'm saying I'm very much tied. I have my stick in the mud. Like, I'm convinced the Bible does not define death like you're defining it. So yeah, I mean, like, I'm saying something's calling me back to say, look, that's not death. What you're saying happens is that's not dying. That's just like, that's something else. So you're right, I guess, but it's just like, so I guess I should just appeal more to the verses in the Bible to make that point, but to be more clear, I guess. Okay, that's fair. That's a fair critique. I'm just arguing that, I guess. It's hard to face that reality, I guess. But you're still wrong about death, so I'm right anyway.
But think of the counter arguments, though, right? Because I brought up immutability. What about eternality? Eternality, by its very nature, does not begin nor does it end. So if Jesus ends at any point in time, he is not definitionally, he is not eternal, right? Because that's what eternal means: without beginning, without end. He's certainly not atemporal, which technically you could make an argument that atemporality and eternality are not the same thing.
Yeah.
But atemporality is to be not bound by time, right? So that view of death now sacrifices immutability, atemporality, and eternality.
Yeah, I'm willing. I guess I'm willing to go there, and it's probably why you've probably heard me say things like, I think it really is a big deal that the divine Son, who is eternally existing, when he took on becoming a human and then died for us, and now he is in some sense a human, a kinsman redeemer for eternity. I tend to think of it that way because I think like the sacrifice he made is incredible, because the person who has always existed took on humanity temporally, and then maybe I don't know, and there's a sense of me that says, wow, isn't that amazing what God did? Like, he gave up part of himself, and like, so what is it talking about? Well, are you saying Jesus isn't really fully God anymore?
Well,
No,
you really ought to say set aside. You really ought to say set. I said you ought to say set aside when we're talking about Christological matters, because Christ did not put away or lose any of his attributes.
Well, I don't see how you can be a human if you have God attributes in the fullest sense. There's a sense where that makes no sense.
When we're talking about Philippians 2, for example, we're talking about his majesty and glory, for example. Even though he incarnated, he clearly didn't set aside his majesty and his glory.
Oh, that's an interesting. I would say I get that. That's probably right. But there's a sense to me where it seems to me that the text does want to like, and I think people miss this, and I could be wrong. I probably am wrong. I don't know. But it seems like we're so sensitive to like not making Jesus not God, and I think he's God. Okay, so it's not what I'm arguing, but I'm saying the text doesn't seem to be as concerned as often we are, and we miss things like, the one who dwells in unapproachable light, who has immortality and all that. To me, that's clearly in the context of the man Jesus and what he accomplished as a man for humanity. In no way does that have to detract that he's God any more than the verses that kind of sound on first reading like oneness aren't really teaching oneness. They're emphasizing a different attribute, that we would argue. So I would just kind of argue the same way. Yeah, I'm not demoting Jesus by emphasizing his humanity in certain places. I just think the text does that. But I think because of what the text says elsewhere to harmonize everything, I think it's good to take notice that there's a reason it's emphasizing his humanity and what his purpose and mission was accomplishing and showing us. So I don't know.
So it's kind of unnecessary though.
Maybe I get a chance on later.
If you take a different view on the anthropology of human beings, then you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. You can still say Jesus died in every sense that a human being dies, sans the second death, and he was fully God and he was fully man, because that spiritual element, whatever it is not yet destroyed, having not gone through the second death, which is an ultimate annihilation. right? So the only thing, and this is just my opinion, but I think the only thing which causes this hang up where you're like, you know, are you saying Jesus doesn't really die, or is it true that Jesus is in some sense setting aside his status, which I think Philippians 2 kind of says that. I think you're maybe saying it a little bit too strongly, but nevertheless, you know, Philippians 2 does essentially say that he did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, right?
Yeah, he didn't know when his second coming was. He seemed to be the Father.
I'm trying to see if there is a chance.
You're up. Bruce is up.
Let me be a little more precise while I'm thinking about it, because I've pulled up the text of Philippians 2, and it would be more accurate to say that
It'd be more accurate if you actually follow Jesus.
It would be not. It would be inaccurate to say.
It would be more accurate if you actually follow Jesus.